To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
Hey, true crime fans. Tired of ads interrupting your gripping investigations? Good news. With Amazon Music, you have access to the largest catalog of ad-free top podcasts included with your Prime membership. After all, ads shouldn't be the scariest thing about true crime. To start listening, download the Amazon Music app for free or go to amazon.com/ad-free true crime. That's amazon.com/ad-free true crime to catch up on the latest episodes without the ads.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Super real.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. So I was out on the weekend, and we ended up at a nightclub with a line out the front with a bouncer. And I was in the line, and I got up to the bouncer, and he was this big guy, and he eyed me up and down. And I became immediately self-conscious, and I was fumbling my words, and I just couldn't believe the power that this man had over me. And, it was okay. It was fine. He let me in. But this moment, just this little beat, made me reflect on my history with nightclubs. And that's because, to be honest, I don't have much of a history. I think in my early 20s, I was so intimidated by coolness that I just opted out. I was more into camping. My idea of like a fun Saturday night was getting a box of wine and heading to the beach to have a bonfire. And I think when I did go out, I was so determinedly apathetic about getting into nightclubs that I didn't really dress up. So, of course, I didn't get in. But still, it kind of hurt a little bit. I think getting turned away from a nightclub is a bit like letting someone peer into your soul and then getting told that you don't measure up, that you're not good looking enough, that you're not socially successful. It's a special type of humiliation. And I just think it never quite goes away. Standing in this line the other night, I was teleported back to my early 20s. And it's how I got reflecting upon the nature of coolness that is so embodied by nightclubs. And that's how I started thinking about Studio 54. Okay, so I didn't know anything about Studio 54. If you'd come up to me in that moment and asked me, hey, what's Studio 54? I'd have said, like a New York nightclub from a long time ago that is famous for being cool. I didn't know anything else, but I was immediately interested. So when I got inside this nightclub, I did the dorkiest thing in the whole world, which is also probably why I was never let into nightclubs. I beelined for the nearest couch, and I sat down, and I pulled out my phone, and I Googled Studio 54. And here's what I learned. So Studio 54, it was opened in 1977 in New York at the peak of the disco era. And it was an old TV studio that got converted into a nightclub by these two guys, these two entrepreneurs named Steve Rebell and Ian Schrager. And keep those names in mind because they're going to come up lots today. That's Steve Rebell and Ian Schrager. And Studio 54 was an immediate hit. It landed at this really interesting time in American history when the optimism of the 1960s had kind of soured, but the hedonism was still going strong. Renting an apartment in New York at that time was relatively cheap, so the city was full of artists doing amazing things. This was the era of Andy Warhol, Patti Smith, Talking Heads, Calvin Klein had just started making jeans. Halston was tearing up the catwalks with outfits made of ultra suede. And Studio 54 became the center of gravity for all of this music and fashion and all of these celebrities and people in New York City who were manufacturing global culture. And that's why all these years later, people still talk about it. And why when I'm thinking about nightclubs, when I'm trying to examine the nature of coolness, I think of Studio 54. So my next thought, sitting on this couch, Googling Studio 54 was, I should find someone who was there and interview them on the podcast. To see Studio 54 at the peak of its power and to grasp at some of that social currency, some of that coolness that I think still eludes me a little bit. And that's how I came upon Myra Scheer. Myra was a personal assistant to one of Studio 54's founders, which means that she was in charge of making sure that the celebrities got in for free while everyone else paid cover. She also had a really interesting POV across everything that went on at the club's last year of existence. Actually, that's really interesting. The original Studio 54, as in the Studio 54 that was under the command of Ian and Steve, it only existed for 3 very short years, between 1977 and 1979. Myra's going to tell me some stories about what it was like to be there and what she learned about the nature of coolness and exclusivity. So here we go. Here is Myra Scheer. Myra, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm on the other side. I have my own show, and I'm the one doing the interviewing and worrying about the time and the editing. So it's a pleasure just to have you in charge.
Oh, well, that's very good. I'm grateful to have you. So we're going to be talking about Studio 54. We're going to be talking about New York, but you didn't actually grow up in New York. You grew up in Savannah, Georgia. So set up the background for me.
Yes, I grew up in Savannah, Georgia. My mother was from New York, and my father was born in Savannah. And I grew up in the 50s, which was a really interesting time to be in the South. I was raised Jewish. My parents owned a deli until I was about 11 or 12. And actually, we all went to the University of Georgia. Go Dogs. And it was there that I met my friend Suzanne. And we were just, kind of Suzanne taught me how I thought to be sexy. But it was a time when women were, where I grew up, women were either good girls or sluts. So then all of a sudden there was all this liberation, and I was a nice Jewish girl. But we moved and got to New York in 1976. It was the same year that Jimmy Carter was elected president from Georgia. And we thought, well, it's a good year for Georgians. Why don't we move there?
That's fantastic. So in 1976, New York was a very different place. My understanding is that the city was on the verge of bankruptcy. So can you describe the look, the feel, the smell? What did you move to?
Well, New York was scary. So moving there in 76, I'll give you an example of this girl, fish out of water in New York. I'm taking the dog to the park. I live right across the street from Central Park. And I hear over a microphone this voice that's resounded, obviously from a mic, I don't care who you fuck as long as you fuck me. And I'm like, oh my God, who can say that word? Much less out loud in New York City. And it turned out it was Patti Smith giving a concert on the Great Lawn, which I lived across the street from. And that was like, yeah, New York, you can cuss. But one of the real reasons I moved to New York is there was a fairy princess roller skating around New York and saw me and took this magic wand and anointed me with the magic wand. And I was like, oh my God, Joanne, did you see that? What was that? Who is that? And she goes, that's Rollerina. She roller skates here all the time. And I'm like, in the South, Rollerina would have been institutionalized. In New York, she was friendly and everybody knew her. And that planted kind of the seed that maybe as a creative person, this might be the place for me.
Oh, Myra, I'm jealous. I'm jealous. I have to admit that I live in suburbia. You know, the creative juices don't flow here quite like the world that you're describing.
Well, and it was also, you know, walking the streets of New York was better than a play. There was all kinds of people that New York welcomed.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Do you remember the first time that you heard of Studio 54?
Yes, I do remember the first time because Suzanne and I met this woman, Bernadette, and Bernadette was a baroness, or so we thought. And she was telling us that this place just opened this week named Studio 54, and did we want to go? We said, sure, you know, we didn't know what it was. And she got us right in, and you know, it was incredible. But you know, to me, I just chalked it up to this is what New York was. You know, this is incredible New York. I didn't know how incredible it was by itself.
Okay, I'm trying to get a sort of temperature check on, even though the nightclub at that time was brand new, were people talking about it? Was it a big deal, or did it kind of just open in obscurity?
No, I think Studio 54 started to get a lot of publicity. It started out literally opening night. They were removing the garbage out the back door as the front door was opening. They were moving out the ladders and stuff. And it just opened from the get-go. It was hot. As Steve Rubell would say, you got to start out hot. It started out hot.
Why did it start out hot?
Well, they had a club called the Enchanted Garden. So they had, you know, and there was this woman, Carmen D'Alessio, who was like this nightlife queen. And Carmen is the one, I believe, that found the space. And they thought, Ian and Steve thought, can we fill it? And she, you know, they didn't know. So, and it also was a club that was in 3 levels. You know, you had the dance floor, then you had the mezzanine, and then you had the balcony. And Ian said that was really major at the time, just to have those 3 layers. And the architect, Scott Romley, when he walked into the space, he knew right away that the star was going to be the dance floor.
As it should be. The star should always be a dance floor in a nightclub. So do you remember the first night that you personally went there?
You know, I don't really like, you know, I don't remember the opening night, but I went other nights, and, you know, it was just incredible. It was glamorous. It was the vibe. It was beautiful people. And I'd be at the bar talking to somebody, and then I'd go, oh my God, that's one of the Smothers Brothers. But I would be cool and not say, you're one of the Smothers Brothers. Like, it was like, you know, there was something about it where at that time, people just didn't people weren't so starstruck.
Okay. All right. Tell me about how you got a bit more entrenched in the club's culture. Like, I understand you just sort of started going fairly often.
Well, not really often. You know, there was a door fee, so I didn't go that much. But when I did, it was always an adventure, and there was always something fun. You know, one of my favorite stories is in '77 when Studio opened, in that January when Jimmy Carter was inaugurated. I went to his inauguration because my friend worked for him, and so when I started going to Studio, my friend, he was Rosalind's appointment secretary, and he wanted to go to Studio 54. Could I get him in? And I said, I didn't think I could get him in. I said, but you know what, I'll try. So I called Studio 54, and I was working at a temp job, and I asked to speak to Steve, and he couldn't take the call. But then we left a message, and I said it was about getting some people in from the White House. And so I'm working my temp job, and it was when the calls went through a receptionist, and the receptionist goes, Myra, Steve Rubell is on the line. Now, everybody knew who Steve Rubell was by then. This was like a year or so into it. Everybody knew. By then, Studio 54 was the place to be. We had mobs trying to get in. And so I said, Steve, hi, and I told him how many people. He said, you're on the guest list. So I couldn't believe it. I was over the moon. So, and it was Rick and one of his friends that also worked in the White House, and the guy who worked in the White House's niece, and me. So we go there to get in because we're on the list, right? I'm all that. I got them in. Go up to Mark, who I didn't know then.
He was the doorman.
And I touched him to get his attention. And he looks at me and he goes, "Don't touch me." And I knew that wasn't the reaction I kind of was expecting. And I said, "Hi, we're on the guest list." He did not look at me again. He didn't say anything except for "Don't touch me." And I saw the looks on their faces, and I felt like I had disappointed my country. I failed my country to get these men from the White House into Studio 54, and I felt terrible. And the niece from Tennessee, everybody just was so disappointed. And then I saw Steve through the crowds, and I just got that, what we call chutzpah, this shy little girl from Savannah. I made my way there, and I said, "Steve, tomorrow we're on the list," and Mark wouldn't let us in, or something like that. Whatever I said, he said, "Show me your friends, come with me." And we got in. Steve Rubell got us in. And little did I know I'd be working for him one day, but I fell in love with him that night, and I'm still in love with him.
Yeah, I would have too. How lucky. I can't believe that happened. I feel like I've spent a lot of time outside nightclubs getting turned away. "Don't touch me" pretty much sums it up. So you got lucky that you happened to see Steve at that very moment, and he let you in.
It was divine intervention. I mean, again, he didn't even have to let me in. And I learned, of course, working there, because you think you're on the list, it doesn't matter. The list had codes, and if it had an NFU by your name, that meant no fuck up. But if it had pay, which was what was by my name, it was the discretion of the doorman. So they didn't have, just because you were on the list, it was still the discretion of the doorman. But the person on the list didn't know that, I'm sure.
Let's take a moment here to just dig into the whole sort of VIP velvet rope policy here at Studio, because it's famous. It's famous for being an exclusive club that was really hard to get into. Most people got turned away. That's my understanding. I guess you now know why certain people got in and certain people didn't. And what was the deal there?
Well, that's a Mark question, but I'll tell you what I've learned by working with him. He said it was about the energy and the shoes.
Okay. Can you tell me more?
You didn't need, just because you were rich didn't mean you'd get in Studio 54. That sense of you belong. You had, it was, I would call it confidence and charisma, but you didn't have to be famous and you didn't have to be rich. You could be I have a quote, you could be a kid from Queens, you could be a drag queen, or you could be a relative of the queen, and you'd be dancing on the dance floor. So it was like a mixture, and what made it especially liberating was the LGBTQ plus community was top of the list.
And this was at a time when homophobia was pretty common.
Well, this was, not Stonewall was when, people were in San Francisco too. If you were gay or a drag queen, you get beaten by the police at bars. Yeah, it was a time that, again, it was liberating, because all were welcome once you got in the door. And of course, the most famous quote I think Andy Warhol said about Studio was that it was a dictatorship at the door and a democracy on the dance floor. But once you got in, it could be anybody, from a drag queen to a socialite, would be dancing with each other.
Do you know much about Mark's thesis on shoes?
Shoes weren't, back then, they weren't a big deal like they are now, but that was one thing that mattered.
What were the right shoes? I mean, I'm trying to basically figure out if I'd have got in.
Well, there was Maud Frison, they had hip shoes, and I'm sure it had to go all together.
Okay.
The way you dressed was was important too, to, again, the confidence and the glamour.
And shoes. So tell me about how you got a job there.
I went on my birthday and with Suzanne and a bunch of people, I'm sure. And I met this woman, Shay, who had just moved to New York from LA. And she was a Playboy centerfold one time in her life. And so we just bonded. We became friends. So she was looking for a job, Shay. At that time, I was looking to perhaps move to LA because I met these guys that were going to open a roller disco called Flippers. And I thought they were going to give me a job and I was going to move to LA. So anyway, Shay wound up getting the job at Studio 54. This was like in 1978. So she was overwhelmed and she was like, Myra, can you help me out? I'm going to see if I can get you to help me out because I know it'll only be temporary. And I thought, okay, why not? I thought I was going to go for the interview. I thought I was going to be working with Shay. And I walked in the door for the interview, and there was Ian at a desk. And then to my left, there was a couch. And out of my little peripheral vision, I saw it was Steve and his mother sitting at the couch. And with Ian, he looked like a guy I had dated when I was in college. So he felt familiar. And then when I saw Steve with his mother, my heart melted. He was my kind of guy. He was a nice Jewish boy. So they interviewed me, and it was like they weren't going to put an ad in the New York Times, put it that way. Hired on the spot. I fit the bill, and I think they were looking for a secretary, just somebody to help out and to help Shay. Although I was really, from the get-go, I was Ian's assistant, and then later became Steve's assistant, and then later actually helped at the door.
I mean, these guys are the brains behind the operation. We should spend a moment just getting to know them. So how would you describe Ian?
Ian was, he was a genius. And I don't know if and he found like his sweet spot, as they say in yoga. Like he was going to be a lawyer. And then all of a sudden he gave a party, I think, for one of his girlfriends. And he found out he was good at it and he liked it. And so he had this incredible talent for putting people together, for knowing who to hire. I mean, just by the dream team that he had Karen Bacon, who was basically the party planner. If he needed a chorus from Harlem to sing at, somebody's party, she could cast it, she could put it together. So they had this vision. Ian had this vision of, again, taking it and making these backdrops like Broadway so that it was theater. It wasn't a nightclub. You were part of a one night only experience that if you never got in again, some people have told us they remember it the rest of their life. But when I was doing the inner door and people got in, it was a corridor to the main dance floor and people were screaming. I called it the corridor of joy because they got in. And there was that, that they got in. And of course, the regulars, contributed to just the glamour of who you're dancing next to.
So was Ian, what sort of skill set did he bring to the duo?
Well, he was to the building, to the space, what Steve was to the people. And that was, to wow them.
Okay. And tell me about Steve. How would you describe him?
Steve, he was just one in a million. He had this joy in his face like a child. And he loved his family. Like his mother did the coat check tickets. And, he had a brother who was like, Steve probably was about, 5'8" maybe. And his brother was over 6 feet. But his father was a tennis teacher. So he said that studio was his living room. And he treated people like they were in his living room. But if they didn't fit in, he would get them out. If it was they might have snuck in or not, but he would not be shy. And then at the door, if somebody would say to him, Steve, what do I have to do to get in? What do I have to do? He would say, go to Europe for 6 months and come back with a sense of smile. And he would do it kindly, because, and so he was really kind. And I think one of the best things about doing the show and interviewing people that work there is that we get to talk about him, because he certainly passed away in 1988. He died too soon. And, I definitely fell in love with him. And he actually said to me, if I wasn't the other way. So I'd like to, I can't believe he said it. And let me take a picture. And sad to say, I don't have a picture of me with Steve. We just weren't that culture then.
Wow. And I understand it was really tragically, it was AIDS that got Steve?
Steve got AIDS. And it was Diane von Furstenberg, I think, said that the beauty of Studio 54, or what made it so special, it was between the pill and before AIDS had a name. So they were no longer working there in 1980. And that was about when AIDS was just galloping on the scene, and a lot of people were dying and getting it.
What a magical little space, wedged between one historical milestone and another.
And I think that's why a lot of young people are really obsessed with it, because, and they said to us when the documentary came out, I'd give up my youth to have worked at Studio 54, because it was magical. I mean, there was nothing like it. And it was a sanctuary. Like, Steve, if you took a picture that somebody didn't want their picture taken, Steve could ban you. And Steve had power.
Hey, we're just going to stop here for a quick ad break, but stick around. We'll be right back with more What It Was Like.
To get people excited about Boost Mobile's new nationwide 5G network, we're offering unlimited talk, text, and data for $25 a month.
Forever.
Even if you have a baby.
Even if your baby has a baby.
Even if you grow old and wrinkly and you start repeating yourself.
Even if you start repeating yourself.
Even if you're on your deathbed and you need to make one last call.
Or text.
Right, or text. The long-lost son you abandoned at birth.
You'll still get unlimited talk, text, and data for just $25 a month with Boost Mobile.
Forever!
After 30 gigabytes, customers may experience slower speeds. Customers will pay $25 a month as long as they remain active on the Boost Unlimited plan.
Forever.
This podcast is brought to you by eHarmony, the dating app to find someone you can be yourself with. Why doesn't eHarmony allow copy and paste in first messages? Because you are unique, and your conversations should reflect that. eHarmony wants you to find someone who will get you. How are you going to know who gets you? If people send you the same generic conversation starters they message everyone else. Conversations that actually help you get to know each other. Imagine that. Get who gets you on eHarmony. Sign up today.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous two-year contracts, they said, what the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass f- So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This show is brought to you by BetterHelp. So it's September and it's back to school time. And I'm not personally going back to school, but I'm always trying to stay curious. And recently, I'm learning something new. I'm learning how to manage stress. Doing this show every week, it sometimes gets stressful. Sometimes stories fall through right at the last minute and we have to scramble and I get stressed. So I'm just trying to learn some more positive coping skills and how to set boundaries on my time. And I think this is why therapy is so good, because it just teaches you these skills. If you're thinking about trying therapy, maybe give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. You just fill out a brief questionnaire and they match you with a licensed therapist. And if you don't get along with them, you can just switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/whatitwaslike today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/whatitwaslike. So you were working for Ian during the day and Steve at night. I mean, were you working 24 hours?
Well, I started working for Ian, and then Ian and Steve, I can't really remember. I did about 2 or 3 nights a week. So my job at the door was to, if you were on the list and you were comped, I would let you in. Or if you had to pay, I would take your receipt because the cashier was to my left. And people paid to get in and they got a receipt and I would take the receipt. And sometimes Steve would call me and say, can you take Neil Young on a tour? And Steve loved Neil Young. And yes, hello, yes, I will take Neil Young on a tour. And he lasted about 15 minutes. I think it was a little too much for him.
What, you got him inside and Neil Young, the country rocker, was like, yeah, a bit much, too much hedonism.
Well, I took him to the DJ booth. I took him around, showed him this stuff. And, that was enough for him. But he said he was there and whether he went back or not didn't matter. He wanted to try it. And he was definitely a VIP to Steve.
Yeah, to many people, to most people. Can you run me through some celebrity stories? I mean, who else did you meet?
Andy Warhol was there. Just about every night I was there, Andy Warhol was there.
Oh, yeah? Tell me about Andy.
Well, Andy was on the call list because Steve gave me, it was like, if it were today, you would call it the influencers. There was 8 pages. So he was organized enough by the time I got there to have an 8 pages of master call list. And he would have me call people and invite them like Andy Warhol. And I remember the first time I called Andy Warhol, I called Interview Magazine and I said, can I speak to Andy? Who's calling? Myra for Steve Rubell. Andy gets right on the phone. Said, hi, Andy, it's Myra, Steve Rubell. Steve would like you to come to this party for blank, whatever it was. They had backdoor parties then, which were kind of free parties where people would come in the back door and you really had to be on a list for who would do the backdoor parties. And some of the designers would do, but they were exclusive parties. And at 12 o'clock, the screen would lift up and they would be in the club with everybody else. So that was, yeah. So Andy would come in sometimes to the back door or he'd come in the front always with people, always with an entourage. There was a Tinkerbell, somebody called Tinkerbell, and he hung out with creative people.
These were people that were part of his entourage at the factory. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. What was your impression of Andy Warhol? And I ask that because every time I've seen an interview with him, he strikes me as a pretty weird guy.
Yeah, well, when you walk around with that hair like that, he was definitely weird, but good weird. I mean, he would come in and photograph cakes. If there was a cake that night, he was, just doing his own thing.
I want to let's just go through a few more celebrities, just because it seems to be one of the things that made Studio 54 work. Did you ever meet any of the Rolling Stones?
Yes, yeah, they can. Mick and Keith. I've said this in the documentary. They were comped, but the rest of the Stones had to pay. And so at the party, we were in the office. And Gwen Rivers is her name, and Mick Jagger was in the office. I mean, I'm in the office with Mick Jagger. It's pretty cool. We talked about World War III because there was a movie out called World War III, or a TV series, the T-shirt. But before that, Gwen, who was 17 at the time, it was adorable. She goes, Myra, this is Mick Jagger. Mick Jagger, this is Myra. I was formally introduced to him, who was doing that then? He needed no introduction, but it was so sweet. So that's how I met Mick Jagger.
And he was a nice guy?
Oh, yeah. Well, and if you got in Studio 54, what was there to be mean about?
I mean, did you meet any divas? Anyone who was a bit hard to get along with?
Well, no, not. I mean, I was in the catbird seat, really. I was the one that was going to let you in once you got in. If you got through Mark, There were people, though, that would give me a present, like on New Year's Eve. This nothing to do with celebrity. But then, or they would give me a Christmas present. And then at the door New Year's Eve, they would expect me to comp them. And I'm like, no, I'm doing this for Steve. I'm Steve's assistant. I'm going to do what they want. I don't do anything to get any money myself. I mean, I was offered, like, somebody's agent wanted me to get his son in or something, and he put like 5 $100 bills in front of me. That was a lot of money back then, and I said no. But like Diana Ross, when she would walk in from the outside, you could feel the seas parting. You could feel her before she even came in the room, and she would just go right through, almost like she was a queen, like royalty. She was, exceptional energy. It was just like amazing. The seas would part for Diana Ross, and she was there. She was there a lot. But, David Bowie would come in. That was one of Mark's loves, when David Bowie came in. And a lot of celebrities were insecure. They wanted to make sure their publicist came with them because, to not get in. John Kennedy Jr. got in. He came in. He was so handsome.
Yeah. I understand that fashion designers were a big part of this scene. I mean, Calvin Klein was just coming up in the world at that time.
Fashion designers, again, Steve was to recognize how important they were. And the fashion designers had celebrities then. Oh, yeah, Calvin Klein, another amazing, energetic person. And I could be in the main floor, and I could be there, and nobody would be really paying any attention or who I was if I wasn't doing the door that night. And then when Calvin would come over and say hello, and it was obvious that I knew Calvin or that he was nice and said hello to me, people just perked up and like, who is she? Who is she? Like he was a star, and he was a star maker.
Yeah. I want to talk for a moment about, because there were a lot of people that didn't get in. I heard a story that someone was handing out maps on how to sneak into Studio 54 from the subway or something.
Well, there was a rumor that somebody died at trying to get into Studio 54 in some pipes or some duct. And I remember I was interviewed in the very early, like when the first people to do a story on Studio, the Afterglow was VH1. And they said, did somebody die getting in? And I said, no, but people were dying to get in. And I didn't even know that was meant to be funny. But nobody died getting into Studio 54.
I wanted to ask you about that, actually, because that's a moment in the, the Holston, I think it was on Netflix or something, with Ewan McGregor, was there as a moment in which a woman is depicted. She's found dead in an air vent. And I was wondering, is that made up? It's fiction.
Made up. That's fiction. Real or imagined. It's imagined. And it definitely, according to the head of security, Chuck Garlick, nobody died getting in the studio. But somebody did fall from the top floor trying to sneak in, and they got really, they broke some bones, but they didn't die. And actually, Liz Smith was a columnist, a very famous columnist, and she wrote about how it wasn't fair that people couldn't get into Studio 54. So Steve and Ian, on what they called the dark night, when there was no studio and it could be rented, they created a Liz Smith night. And, the Earl Wilson, who had a column back then, mentioned it, that it was going to be anybody could get in on this Liz Smith night. And when the line was around the block, and it was amazing. So they did compensate, at least for that, where anybody can get in. You just had to wait in line.
Wow. There's a real dark art to getting into exclusive nightclubs. I mean, these days, people talk about how hard it is to get into Bergheim. And it's got this whole, there's Reddit forums on people talking about how hard it is to get into this nightclub. And Studio 54, it had that same sort of thing. And I'm wondering, could Studio 54 have been as magical as it was if anyone could get in?
I'd say no, because Steve recognized that there was an energy, like he could see who couldn't fit in. Like if my brother once told me, my brother Jerry, that somebody said to him, you can travel the world looking for beauty, but if you don't take it with you, you'll never find it. And that was like, if you thought Studio 54 was going to make you something, you were looking to take. But if you thought you were something, you were looking to give. And that was the difference.
I mean, it makes sense when you say it like that, but also that's a very ethereal concept.
Well, like I said, Steve would say, go to Europe.
Yeah.
or meet Andy Warhol and come in with him.
Yeah. I'm curious, if I ask you, what was your single favorite memory from Studio 54? What comes to mind?
Well, the theme parties were fantastic. And then for Valentine's Day, one year, they had women in white gowns doing harps when you walked in through the door. And Halloween was definitely Ian's favorite. And the Halloween I worked there, he hired this guy to do like a fun house. And the Karen Bacon cast, like they would have two little people, dining and getting drunk in one of the rooms. And then they would have mice on the floor in another room. So it would be like really a fun house. So that was pretty cool.
And there was a night where I understand that like 3 tons of glitter or something was just dumped on the dance floor in a huge pile.
That was New Year's Eve. And we joked that just a few years ago, they changed the carpet in my building and it still had that glitter. There was glitter all over Manhattan from that New Year's Eve. It was pretty crazy. I mean, they just transformed it. Like Ian was a genius with completely coming up with these ideas that would wow the people that wowed other people.
Yeah. So let's move into the era where it came undone. What's your sort of first memory of Ian and Steve getting in trouble?
Well, by the time I got there, they already had the raid. They found, I guess, some paperwork about income tax and some drugs. I don't even know what the charges were, but it looked like they were going to not go to jail and it was going to be okay. And the first indication that maybe it wasn't going to be okay, I think, was in November when New York Magazine did the story, "The Party's Over." And that hurt. And I think Steve and Ian went to Florida when that came out because they didn't want to be inundated with the press. And Michael Jackson was coming that night to a party, and Steve called just to know how everything was going on. But I still think we thought they were going to, that Roy's got this and nothing was going to happen. And then the day that they were sentenced, I was by the receptionist with the people that worked there, the day people, and they said it on the that they were sentenced to whatever, I forget what it was, 2 years or something. And we were stunned. We were in shock. And about that time, the back door buzzer rang. Somebody was trying to get in. And I went and let them in, and it was Karen Bacon. It was a party that night. And it was a party, I think it was a Giorgio Armani party. And it was a Monday night. And Karen walked in and she looked there was these gay dance troupe dancing at the Truffladoras or something were their names. Forgive me if I'm not pronouncing it or don't remember it. And she looked at them and she said, "Oh, what a weird waltz." And I remember thinking, that's what this has been for me. This has just been a weird waltz. And it may be ending, because again, we were pretty shocked what that meant.
Okay, so did Steve and Ian end up going to prison?
They ended up going to prison, and by the grace of God, they got to go together. So they had such a strong bond. They never signed a contract. They truly were a remarkable partnership. And really, Ian and Steve just were Ian brought something that Steve didn't bring, and Steve brought something that Ian didn't bring, and they both brought it on an extreme level. And together, they just created it.
Yeah. Do you remember the last party when Studio 54 was run by Steve and Ian?
I remember the night before, I guess they went away. Steve had his hat on like Frank Sinatra, and he went up to the DJ booth, and he played, I think Richie Kazar played I Did It My Way. And he was so cool. Like he just was facing it, and he was going to make the best of it. You know, didn't know what was ahead, but that was his attitude. And and I'll never forget it. I mean, that moment that Steve did it my way, like, you know, like Edith Piaf, no regrets.
Was it a somber night?
Well, it was like mom and dad are going away for us that work there. Yeah.
Okay. And then you got a job in PR.
Yeah. Then I started switching, and I worked at a couple other nightclubs, and then went to beauty and health and not-for-profits. So kind of the other side of the coin.
I'm interested what you took away personally from Studio 54. You know, what do you think that period taught you?
Well, I realized that some people were real and some people weren't real. Like some people, after a studio shut down, I'd see them and they would go, you know, they wouldn't acknowledge me, or they would. You know, some people were just, they were really real nice people, not just because they had to be. And so, you know, and the world of celebrity is kind of well, when I interviewed Yoko Ono, which was a thrill, she was saying the internet will not give you love. It'll give you attention. And I think that's the same thing with fame. It will give you attention, but it won't give you love. And just to be around a famous person, you know, that's not, so what? You know, and our culture is really like when you see people, they just want a picture. And then, you know, what does that do? It's just to thine own self be true. And it's like what we learned on the dance floor of Studio 54, that everybody's a star. And if you could just learn how to turn your star on and believe it, and it takes me, you know, a belief in a loving higher power, and that's how you party on, and just be kind. Like Steve Rubell, like there was one story I just heard where where this guy was working at Enchanted Garden, I think it was, Scotty. And Steve walked him into the kitchen and he said, "Who's the most important person in this club?" And Scotty named some celebrity. And he goes, "No, it's the dishwasher, because without the dishes being washed, none of this can happen." And that's what, you know, it's just like to appreciate everybody. And I learned, you know, that somebody's assistant could be the editor in PR world, you know, so you be nice to everybody.
I think I had this story wrong. I came to this story thinking that this was a story about glamour and celebrity and power. And you're actually saying that what you took from it is more of a story of love with a sort of edge of spiritualism there. And I know that you're now working for various nonprofits. Is this kind of where your interest in helping, giving back, did it start on the dance floor at Studio 54?
You know, that's interesting. Maybe it did. And it's because I just interviewed Tyler. Okay, so this DJ, Tyler Stone, and who wrote this song with this woman, a transgender named Liz Love. And we talked about the afterglow of Studio 54. So you're pretty spot on to back up what I found by interviewing them, because their song that they were promoting, she said, it's not about the love of one person, it's the love of all. And she said, you know, that's what the afterglow of Studio.
That's great. One last thing. So the Felix organization, what do they do and how can listeners help?
The Felix organization?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. I'm on the board of the Felix organization that now is their consultant for like 18 years. So I'm still attached to it. It was co-founded by Sheila Jaffe, who's an amazing casting director who cast The Sopranos. And
wow.
Daryl from Run DMC, McDaniels. They were both adopted, and some Hollywood agent put them together. They met, they instantly bonded and said they want to help kids in the foster care system. So this was 18 years ago. But right now, I'd say donations would be really appreciated. It's thefelixorganization.org, and you can donate or support. Again, this is what, giving is joy of living.
Well, Myra, this has been a beautiful conversation. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you so much for your time.
You're so welcome.
Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple and on Spotify. And you know what? The best thing that you could do, if you want to help, we'd love it if you'd follow the show. That would be incredible. We're also on TikTok. That's right. Our handle is @WhatItWasLikePodcast. That's all one word, What It Was Like Podcast. And it's the same on YouTube. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffrey. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, and he also did our theme music. Darcy Humphreys and Daniela Cantu are our interns. Our cover art is by Naomi Lee Beveridge, and this whole thing has been a Super Real production.
To make switching to the new Boost Mobile risk-free, we're offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
So why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Because you have nothing to lose. Boost Mobile is offering a 30-day money-back guarantee.
No, I asked why wouldn't you switch from Verizon or T-Mobile?
Oh.
Wouldn't.
Because you love wasting money as a way to punish yourself because your mother never showed you enough love as a child?
Whoa. Easy there.
Yeah.
Applies to online activations. Requires port in and auto pay. Customers activating in stores may be charged non-refundable activation fees.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.